This first ever episode, I speak with George, my co-founder, about how we started SEJA, what we've learned along the way, and why we think storytelling matters more now than ever. This is super exciting. George and I have been thinking about doing a podcast for a while now, and so to be stepping off into the void, we're pumped to do it. We're definitely nervous, but we're excited that you guys are here listening to the first episode. So for those of you who don't know, my name's Dylan. I'm the co-host of this podcast, co-founder of SEJA, and George is with me, who's my co-founder in all of those aforementioned projects, as well as many other adventures. And in this first episode, we really wanted to just provide a little bit of context about who we are, our journey, and how we arrived to this point, and to be doing a podcast, and why we think that we can offer something to the space. So in all seriousness, I want to start, George, and just ask you, there is a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of content. Why are we doing a podcast? What do you think that we can add to the space? And why is it, the podcast is called Not Another Impact Report. So why is storytelling an important part of the charity sector, of the nonprofit sector? And why do you think it can improve the way that we're talking about social work?
Yeah, thanks, man. I think, I definitely feel nervous as well. I think, maybe I'll say, why I'm doing this personally first before I talk about SEJA, actually. And that, at the end of last year, I had a little boy called Knox, who's
Shout out to Knox.
Shout out to Knox, who's become sort of my favorite thing ever, along with his mum. And at the beginning of this year, I sort of made a resolution that I wanted to become more confident in myself and start talking about some of the achievements that we've made together, you and I, Dylan, but also SEJA and myself personally as well, and start talking about them and be proud of them. So he has a digital proof, if you like, of what his dad's done. And so I think that's where I'll start, is say, personally, this is a big jump for me. As I'm sure you can tell, I'm feeling pretty nervous, but I feel like it's got a really positive outcome. I feel that what's on the other side of this is really exciting. And so that's sort of the personal side to it. And then I think we're now professionally heading into our 7th year of co-founding a charity organization or a social initiative together, which has been a huge journey. And over the past 7 years, we have written, I don't even want to guess at the number, but tens, if not hundreds, of impact reports. Quite a few impact reports. And in all honesty, I don't know if anyone reads them. I think there's a few people that reads them. I think Dylan's dad is one of them. So shout out Carrington.
For sure. Your brother.
My brother, my sort of to-be father-in-law, Paddy, he's sort of keen reading them all the time. So definitely shout out to those people who've followed our journey that much and been that much involved in reading everything we've ever put out. And I'm really, really grateful for them. But I thought this year we would start to do something a bit differently. And, that's why we called it Not Another Impact Report. It's because we wanted to think about, well, how can we better update our donors and better update our partners and the people following the charity, than a podcast, right? And hearing from the founders themselves. So that's one reason I think SEJA, this is a good decision for SEJA. And then I think the other reason is that, Dylan and I have had this very unique privilege.
Putting words in my mouth now.
Sorry, man. But a very unique privilege and access to the most marginalized communities across Brazil for the past 6 years, and now in turn the world, really. And inside those marginalized communities exist the most empowering, wonderful, resilient people you've ever met. And the sort of people that turn up day in and day out for their community, and they're just unbelievably inspiring. And I don't think that SEJA and me has ever done a good job really at being able to define what that community change maker is, define what these people from these marginalized communities are. Because I think that you've got to meet them. I think over the years we've taken loads of people to favelas, not necessarily donors, but loads of people. And it's when they come out of those communities, that's it's not empowering for the community, it's empowering for the person that goes into it. And so we thought that, not another impact report would be a good place to introduce you to these change makers. And so you can hear firsthand from them as we, SEJA, take a sort of global step, or a global leap, if you like, from Brazil and the small part of work that we've been doing in London. And we take our work of developing community change makers across the world.
Yeah, I think that you hit a lot of interesting points there, but for me, it's doing a better job with our responsibility to share these stories. We have access to amazing people and amazing leaders that have been incredibly inspirational to us and our personal journeys, and we haven't been able to connect the people that care about our work to those leaders, and that's what we hope we can do in this space. So yeah, I think that was really well said, and I know that nobody's going to listen to this in chronological order because nobody, if you get recommended a podcast, you don't go to podcast one and then listen to every single podcast and then get to the current day. But I wanted to provide a little bit of perspective about SEJA and our journey for those of you who don't know, because I think it's important to know that, George and I, we started as two. I'm from the United States. George is from England. We started as two foreigners. We met in the favelas of Brazil, and the kind of the ethos of SEJA, the reason that we started is because behind this inspiration for community leaders and these people who were making a difference in their communities, a lot of times working in the shadows, they didn't get the recognition that not only did they deserve, but they needed to continue growing their work. And so we were so inspired by them, and we wanted to connect them to people in the world who wanted to support them. And so that's a lot of the work that we've been doing, and proving that desire exists, that change makers are best positioned to make impact happen, and that donors want to work with them. But I wanted to ask you a couple questions about the beginning, about the early days. And I just wanted to know, it's interesting for me as a co-founder to what your perspective was, and I think it'll be interesting to other people, but do you remember that moment when you were like, oh, I'm going to start SEJA? Do you remember what you were feeling? Do you remember, is there any distinct memory you have from that moment? And then, a follow-up question to that would be, did you know what you were getting yourself into, and what has surprised you most about this journey up to this point?
Yeah, I mean, there's two really good questions. So just to clarify, everyone, Dylan thought it would be better if I just did this off the cuff. So I'm happy we did do that, because I feel like it is going to be better. But I think I do remember the moment when we decided to start a charity. I think that, Dylan and I happened, as he said, we met in a favela called Rocinha Favela, which is the largest favela in Latin America. But we also met in a time when that favela was experiencing the most deadly gang violence and police violence that the community and city had seen for decades. And and it was around the same time that I was getting introduced, via Dylan, who'd been there before, to community leaders who were inside those communities. And at those times, these young people that are growing up in the community really have no spaces to go. There's no such thing as youth projects in favelas. They're started by local projects. They're started by local people. And these projects started by local leaders were a lifeline for the young people who were in need of them. I think that we don't underestimate what long extended periods of time do for kids on the streets if they don't have access to opportunity. And these local community leaders were in the communities providing that access. At a time when, Dylan and I were both living in favelas at the time, and, there were days that we couldn't leave the the house or the hostel that we were staying in because of shootouts, right? You can't go to the supermarket because the police are shooting at gang members or gang members are shooting at other gang members. Um, and, all too often, young people get caught up in it or they get recruited by the drug gangs. And I know for one, I'm a deeply privileged individual, but I know for one, if I was born into a favela, I would have succumbed to that pressure and I would have joined a gang. Um, but there were these, at the same time as that negativity, there was these community champions, community leaders who were blocking that funnel and providing that said opportunity. And it was that inspiration during that particular conflict that made me want to start the project. And in the beginning, it was probably a project that we didn't think was going to extend beyond Brazil. Um, we were so hyper focused on actually that individual favela at the time and working with one community leader called Edish. So yeah, I think it's really Edish that inspired me, to come full circle. It's, Edish to give everyone an it. I've told her story loads of times and I almost feel sort of bad telling her story because you should really hear her story from her because she's a wonderful human being and everybody would, it's just a privilege to know her. But she opened up her house, which is just a house in the favela, her home, to community children to come and her tagline is swap a gun for a paintbrush. And so she's an art therapist by trade, and she was using art as therapy to work with young people in the community and give them opportunity through art. And it was just the way that she showed up 6, if not 7 days a week at the community center for the kids. The kids come and they stand outside the door and she lets them in and she gives them opportunity and she just, more than enough opportunity, she gives them love. These are young people who just so deeply marginalized, and so love is so important. So yeah, Edish was almost the inspiration to everything. And then to answer the second part of the question of whether I knew what I was getting into, was absolutely not. Honestly, the real truth is I was probably 21, Dylan, maybe younger, 21, and I was naive, so naive, and also armed with this inspiration, which is sort of quite dangerous as well, because I was meeting these unbelievable people like Edish and other community leaders in the communities. I was seeing firsthand the violence, the marginalization, the deprivation. And then you think, in the charity world, it's so easy to think, I'm armed with all this inspiration, all this knowledge of like how hard this really is for people. And you think that you're going to go marching back into your community or into your culture and go, and this is so easy. I'm going to go and fundraise. Everyone's going to give me £100. Everyone's going to give me £1,000. And then I'm going to build something sustainable and long term. But translating that inspiration is incredibly difficult. And so I think, yeah, I could sit here for hours and tell you about how I didn't know what I was diving off into, and about how hard it is, and about how hard fundraising is, how hard storytelling is, how hard building an organization is, how hard the law behind the organization is. Everything, all of it's hard. But what I will say, again, to pair a negative with a positive, is that I am so delighted that I did it. And I'm so delighted I did it with you, Dylan. And I'm so delighted that I just took a jump off the, whatever you want to call it, took a jump off and leaped into it.
Yeah, I think that those are similar feelings and memories that I have, but we talk so much about lived experience in our organization and working people with lived experience. And I think one of the reasons that we value it so much is because it's our own lived experience that inspired us to start the organization. And so our lived experience in the communities, in the favelas, for people who don't know, like a favela is essentially a low income housing, not it's not a complex, but it's where people live in Rio who don't have as much opportunities, and in Brazil, and they have a lot of issues, but it's also one of the most inspiring places that you can go. And I think that lived experience and meeting those people inspired us to start the organization, and that's why we value it so much. But I really appreciated hearing that and the synergies that we have at the beginning. It's special. Another question that I have for you is, I would be lying if I said that we weren't starting this podcast if we, if it wasn't to vent a little bit. I know that we have some built up energy about the nonprofit sector in general and some of the things that we think could improve. I don't want you to get too much into it now, but maybe to spin a negative question and make it positive. What do you think something that can improve about the nonprofit sector, and what are some themes that you think that people can expect to hear when they're listening to it about areas for improvement, and a way that we can get better as an entire industry to really make the impact work for the people who need it and who are doing the work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm trying to think. I know that we're limited on time, so I'm trying to think of like, obviously there's it's really broad, so there's loads and loads of areas which I think need improvement. And
First
actually, I
thing
would,
that comes to mind.
yeah, it's actually one thing why I love where I am is because you can be experimental, and I feel like we're treading water that nobody's tread before. Um, but the first thing that comes to mind is amplifying the community voice. I think it's no, I don't want to sit here and pretend that charities don't talk about hiring local people, because they do, or local change makers, because they do. But it's less about hiring local change makers and telling them what to do. It's more about hiring or collaborating with local communities and having them tell you what to do. Um, and so that's probably the first area, I think, as a, sector wide, I think there's room for improvement, is to slap the marginalized voices at the forefront of the third sector and make sure that they're really heard. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think the next two things I'm going to say sort of directly conflict each other, but bear with me. I think that core budgets for charities are really, really important, and it's sort of a slightly boring answer, but and I'm sure everybody's heard it 100 times, but we still struggle as a charity 6 years on, and we'll always struggle forever to try and raise core budget and get corporates or personal or private donors to support the core operation of the charity, because charities need to operate like businesses. And I've been banging this drum for years about why it's so important, and why investing in a marketing budget or investing in a fundraising budget, which is ultimately going to turn into more funds so the charity can achieve its objectives, is fundamentally crucial and should not be overlooked. So I think that when people say, well, or the typical question of how much is going to the cause, it's a good question, but always remember that the core operation of the charity is why it exists, and all charities need to operate like businesses. So that's the second thing I'd say. And then, I said I was going to say something contradictory to that, and it is definitely contradictory, because, whilst I believe that to be true, I also think that we can be more efficient in our giving in a way that, to big up what SEJA does and what we want to do is provide direct opportunities for funders and donors to provide direct funding, so we can move money from a private foundation in the UK or a private foundation in the US or anywhere in the world directly into a community at 99% or 95% or whatever it might be. Which is, by the way, from an industry perspective, that's like unbelievable, so much better, right? And so I think that whilst, yes, we need to look after the core of the charity and make sure it can operate, and I think that there's a way that corporates can do that and be responsible for that and want to be responsible for that. I also think there's a better way that your everyday donors like us, who want to give £5-10 a month, can give directly to the heart of the community, and we can do that better now using software and tech. So
Yeah,
so
just
yes.
keep removing barriers and making that connection, facilitating that connection, something that we've always been trying to do, and we're trying to get better at it day on and day on. But the more that we can remove ourselves from that equation, the better, because the more autonomy that the donor will have, and the more autonomy that the change maker will have. So I definitely agree with that, and hopefully we can keep working towards that goal. I just have three quick questions for you to close it out. Some rapid fire questions. I'm going to give them to you all at the same time, and then you can answer them one by one. But the first one is, what kind of story are you dying to share through this podcast? What do you hope people will feel when they're walking away from this conversation? Not this specific one, but conversations on this podcast in general. Um, and also, why do you think this work matters? Like, not in theory, but like really in your gut. Why does the work that you do day in and day out matter? The work from SEJA, why does it matter? So those are my three questions. If you can give me a sentence each, 30 seconds each, that'd be great.
Yeah. So the first question, I think, what story am I dying to tell? It is the story of, local leadership. I think that, I just feel so uniquely privileged, as I said, because we've had this access to be inspired by all these amazing community change makers. And I know that there's a better way to get people access to them. And I know that, there's a way that they could be also inspired by them, and they could give to them and feel that what they're doing really, really matters from a charitable giving perspective.
Okay, keep going.
Oh yeah, what's the second question? Sorry, I've forgotten.
Uh, the second question is, what do you hope people feel? What do you hope people feel when they walk away from hearing the conversations that we're going to be having? And just to remind you about the third question, it's, why do you think this kind of work matters? The work that we do, not in theory, but really matters in your gut. The work that you do, why does it matter?
Yeah, so the inspiration, I think, I want people to be inspired by local community change makers. So I want people to come here and listen to the stories of resilience and be inspired by local communities and local community change makers and people right at the center of this, who are smart, wonderful people that could do anything that they wanted, really anything that they wanted, and they could migrate, they could, move to a more affluent part of the city, but they don't. They decide to stay. They remain in the communities because they know that they can, and they've got an idea to create better opportunity for the next generation. Um, yeah, so I would say that's the. I've forgotten your third question. I'm sorry, Dylan. I've forgotten it.
The third question is, why does this work matter? Not in theory, in your gut. Why does your work matter? Why does Sage's work matter?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of feel like I'm banging the same drum, and I've answered all three questions
Bang
with the
it,
same thing.
bang
But
it.
I really think that there's so much opportunity to give the world access to these change makers. I think, so from an inspirational perspective, that's it. It's like, how can we tell the stories of local communities, and how can we tell the stories of local change makers better, so that the donor world, so that the giver world, the subscriber world can be inspired in the same way. There's impact everywhere. And then, like, more boringly, I think, and Dylan absolutely hates this, and but I really think that I'm kind of obsessed with the sustainable development goals, and I feel like there's a really
I do
wonderful
hate those.
opportunity. I feel like there's a really wonderful opportunity to collect the collective impact of local communities and local change makers all across the planet, and read the data and put it towards the goals. Um,
I kind of feel like you've answered my question, but kind of not. I want to, like, why is your work important? Yes, to platform change makers, and it can be for sustainable development goals, but just wondering if you have any more input on that.
is there something that you want me to say?
I'm just curious. I'm just curious.
You mean more personally towards me?
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe that's it. And maybe I'm just pushing in the wrong areas. But no, I think that what you've said is really good. I think the work that we're doing is really important and it's really inspiring, and we've been doing it for a long time. And I think it's important because, you know, in the most cliche way ever, like we want to be a part of this movement that can like make a really positive impact on a large scale and change the world. And I think it's kind of what you're saying, but in summarizing is by by giving a platform to these leaders, by getting people to connect to those leaders, we're going to be able to that's why we think it's so important of what we're doing, not on this podcast, yes, on this podcast, but also with our work, is by being able to get these amazing people all around the world out of the shadows and people to recognize them and be able to fund them directly. The impact that that can create is exponential, and that's what we're really excited about. But also, I didn't want to put words in your mouth. George and I have spent so much time in the same room together that we kind of can finish each other's sentence. We're definitely that couple, that quote unquote couple. But anyways, mate, I think that's it for now.
I was thinking you were gonna set me up. I now sort of understand what you were gonna ask me to do, so I'm just gonna take a dive off and do it. But
Oh, you're gonna go for
yeah,
it.
I'm gonna go for it. I
Oh,
think that I
okay.
wasn't ready to throw myself off on episode one, but I would be lying to you if I said that burning passion in me that when I was naive and 21 didn't still exist. I think at the I I want to change the way charity works. That's the bottom line. Is I want to find a way that makes charity work better for givers and local communities, and but always keeping local communities at the center of every decision we make. And it's a huge and ambitious goal. Because ultimately, if you can change the way that charity works, then you could change the world. But then I wouldn't, I'd be lying if I told you that wasn't still the dream.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the conversation today. And it's exciting. We're kind of stepping off into the void together again. This time with microphones in our hands to really record the journey, so we can look back on it. And I think just like if there's a takeaway message from today, is that we completely understand that there's a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of noise out there, but we really believe that we're building something that's important. We think that sharing these stories is very valuable and very important because at the end of the day, these stories are what inspired us to start an organization, to start a nonprofit. These stories have been fueling our journey and our passion for the last 8 years. And we're really, we're pumped and we're jazzed to see what the ripple effect could be. Because, if these stories and connecting with these people and these amazing change makers inspired us to start an organization and dedicate our lives to it, who knows what it's going to inspire somebody else to do. And I think that's another exciting aspect of opening up these stories to the world. And as George mentioned, we're very excited. We're very privileged to be able to do this. And so once again, thank you so much for kind of tuning into this first podcast. If you're a new SEJA member, welcome. If you're from the family, please give us feedback on this new format. We're very open to hear. And I think foremost as well is if you have a story to tell, if you know a change maker, somebody who's making an impact in your community, or somebody that please get in touch and reach out, because at the end of the day, that's what this space is for. That's what this podcast is for, to tell stories that need to be heard. And with that, we'll see you probably in another month. We might get excited and do one beforehand, but if not, this will be our monthly impact report. And next time we'll have an exciting story and an amazing person with us to come along.
Yeah.
So,
Hopefully
anyways,
less of me and more of a local change maker.
well, maybe we'll do you again, mate. This was a good conversation. George, round two. All right, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you.